research training. And we are grateful today to have an amazing panel of leaders, elders, knowledge keepers of everything that's happened in Indian country around HIV/AIDS and since it hit our communities. And I'm just thrilled that they're here with us today. But first, I want to just acknowledge the territory and whose lands we're in. I guess I should also say that my name Halito Sahachifat Hatubichik Ganchan Vichi Ahoyo, Vicha Chatasi Ahoke. My name is Karina Walters. I'm enrolled in the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. I'm the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute co-director and part of the Big Heart leadership, along with Jen Balkas and at the Center for AIDS Research. It's a joint partnership to have this series to try to bring young Indigenous people who are in undergrad and graduate school into HIV/AIDS science in collaboration and partnership with our Native communities. So we need to bring more Native scientists to the forefront to be able to address HIV/AIDS in our communities from a credible and culturally grounded way. So first, in terms of land acknowledgement, I just want to acknowledge I'm sitting in the territory at my own home of the Snohomish people, who are coastal people here in Washington State. But also, since we're coming from the University of Washington, we also want to recognize that at the UW, we learn, teach, and live on or near the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples whose ancestors have resided here since time immemorial. And the UW Seattle campus is actually situated on the traditional territory of the Duwamish people. And the Coast Salish peoples and many other Indigenous people continue to thrive in these lands, alive and strong and thrive. So we wanted to pay our acknowledgement there. And also we want to extend our acknowledgements and greetings to the lands that you all are in and the Indigenous peoples and territories you're in now. I'm going to turn this over to Jen so she can talk a little bit about the Big Heart and what we're about. And then we're going to kick off with our illustrious panel.
Thank you so much, Karina, and welcome everyone who's here with us today and who will be watching this recording later. We're just so thrilled to have this amazing panel of speakers with us today to share their stories and history and wisdom with all of us. And this today has been part of a series that we put together as part of Big Heart that started in February of this year, and fingers crossed will be continuing into the next academic year, 2022 to 2023. As part of this, we try to facilitate meetings and mentorship of early stage Indigenous HIV researchers, connect individuals who are in sort of the undergrad and graduate spaces with researchers across the field of HIV science at networking events. In particular, try to connect folks with potential internships, job opportunities, lots of sort of different ways to connect and learn more about the HIV science that's going on broadly, and specifically things that are happening at the University of Washington and Fred Hutch, based in Seattle. And lastly, for folks that have been participating, we have been connecting individuals and sponsoring their study as part of the annual Principles of STI and HIV Research and Public Health Practice course, which is this course has been around for the past 30 years and is really recognized across the world as a kind of an amazing crash course on everything you need to sort of the state-of-the-art science on STIs and HIV. And so we'll be sending a couple of folks this year and hope to do the same next year. In terms of events, I just want to highlight another event before we start this one, which is our networking event, and it's not too late to register. We'll have the link is up there on the slide, and we can share it in the chat as well. And so we'll be connecting. It's a fantastic opportunity to learn more about what HIV research is happening from established researchers within our CFAR, learn about potential internships opportunities, and also connect with potential mentors. And we have a really wide array of science that we'll be talking about tomorrow evening. And so hopefully some of you can join us for that as well. And before we talk about our session for today, just a little bit of a plug for our final session, which will be held in July with some of our local mentors and others that have been part of the Big Heart mentorship program and HIV/AIDS training program. And so we're really excited to hear from Dr. Beltran, Dr. Matira, and Dr. Orleana in July, and hopefully you can join us for that as well. So with that, let me turn it back over to Karina, who will introduce and facilitate our panel for today. Oops, Karina, I think you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. We have an amazing panel. We have Sharon Day and Pamela Thurman and Chesbro and Antony Stately all with us today. And all of them have been leaders with respect to HIV/AIDS, both in terms of research, but as practitioners, as community elders and healers, and they've all activists as well. They've all been at the forefront of working in collaboration with our communities to address and eradicate HIV/AIDS, but also to help us live healthfully and well, writ large, not just in terms of HIV/AIDS. So I'm just thrilled to have them, and I'm going to allow them to introduce a little bit about themselves. I have to say, selfishly, I wanted to be here for this panel too, because I think they're just amazing people and leaders and great speakers. So I'm just thrilled to have them all here. They've all been engaged in various forms in our Indigenous HIV/AIDS research training program as mentors as well. I had a chance to work with Tommy on a national HIV/AIDS conference a number of years ago as well. So anyway, without further ado, we'll start with Sharon Day, who Sharon headed up the Indigenous Peoples Task Force. She's one of the amazing she's led the water walks for many, many years. And with that, I'll turn it to Sharon to introduce herself.
Bonjour, Ninendwe Maganidug, Nagamo Maingen and Dishnakaz, Wabashashi and Dodem, Ojibwe Kwe and Dao, Dishnijo Medeo, Mede Wanakwe and Dao. So in English, greetings, my relatives. My name is Singing Wolf, and I'm a Ojibwe woman. I'm from the Martin clan, and I'm second degree Medewan, and also one of the head water women. And I'm just happy to be here tonight.
Pamela Thurman, please introduce yourself. I just want to say Pam has been is the mother of the community readiness model, and she's had a stellar career engaging tribal communities and funded grants and projects as well for substance abuse prevention, as well as HIV/AIDS research, HIV/AIDS prevention, and she's a great storyteller and loves ghost stories. So
we share several, don't we, Karina?
We do.
My name is Pamela Thurman. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee tribe, and I like to acknowledge the land that I'm on right now, especially given the new McGirt ruling. As Karina knows, both our Choctaw and Cherokee nations are now recognized reservations, as they should have been all along. So I want to give that acknowledgement. And I'm a clinical psychologist by profession and a researcher, epidemiologist. And like Karina said, I love to chase ghosts and I love stories.
Dr. Antony Stately, please go ahead and introduce yourself. I had the pleasure of working with Antony directly for many, many years with the Honor Project, our first, actually the only national Native American LGBT HIV prevention, as well as other health prevention study in the country. So, and Antony continues to serve our communities in Minneapolis right now. So go ahead, Tony.
Awesome. Thank you, Karina. Good evening, everyone. I'm Antony Stately. I'm an enrolled citizen of the United Nation of Wisconsin and a descendant of the Great Red Lake and White Earth Nations of Minnesota. I am a person living with HIV. I've been living with HIV since 1990 or 91, I think, somewhere around there. I can't remember. Anyway, a long time. And I'm also a clinical psychologist by training, and in my current role, I am the executive officer of the Native American Community Clinic in South Minneapolis, in an area called the American Indian Culture Corridor, and we're like, myself and Sharon are blocks from each other, our organizations. We see each other quite a bit. And I'm also on the board of ITGF, her organization. And so, you know, living with HIV for a long time, and also like working in the area of this work and its impact on our communities for quite a long time. Before I joined UW, I was the director for client services at AIDS Project Los Angeles, and we launched this, you know, it started out small, but turned out to be a much larger program for prevention for Native people with HIV a few decades ago. And I think it went for a really long time. It stopped maybe about 6 years ago. But yeah, been around a long time. Privileged to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That leaves Tommy.
Yes, Tommy.
Last but not least.
Absolutely not. Take it away, Tommy.
Okay, Osio Tohichu, Tommy Chesbro, Dawa Doa, Ayachi, Chalagi, Ale Lambi, Ale Yoneg, Ale Genege. In English, hello, peace be with you. My name is Tommy Chesbro. I'm a descendant of the Cherokee and Lumbee people, and also am European and African American in ancestry as well. Like Tony or Antony, I have been living with HIV for a long time myself. I was infected in 1985 and began working for Indian Healthcare, the urban clinic here in Tulsa in 1992. I am currently sitting on the Creek Reservation, Muskogee Creek Reservation in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And over the years, I have worked with Antony, Sharon, Pamela, and Karina many times in many different projects. We've all done work with SAMHSA and Office of AIDS Research and CDC and the list, NAPSI and IHS. List can go on forever. But this is an amazing group of people, and I'm honored to be here with them today. And I'll just leave it at that for now.
Great, thank you. We wanted to allow this time for each of you to maybe share a little bit of what you'd like to share. You have about 10 minutes each, and then open it up for just conversation and dialogue, and opportunity for people online to also ask questions and share, and seek your guidance and wisdom as well. So, you know, Sharon, would you like to start? And then we'll kind of go in the same order that we just went in, if that's easiest to go with that flow, or if you all want to do it differently, I'll defer to you. So.
That's fine for me. Is it okay with everyone else? Okay. Well, I began this journey around 1987. My younger brother and a woman, a Native woman in the community, she was a nurse. They both told me that they had AIDS, and in 1987 there wasn't such a thing as HIV. You had an AIDS diagnosis, and most of the time that you know, there weren't any medications at that time. So I was working for the state of Minnesota for Department of Human Services, and Carol LaFavor said to me, you know, what are you going to do about this? And she had contracted it through Shared Needles with, you know, other people in the Native community. And so we got a small group of people together and I was able to hire a young woman at the time, Lori Bolio, her name was now Lori Watso, to do a curriculum, develop a curriculum, 8-hour curriculum, and to take that to 4 areas of the state at the end of the summer. And she did that. And we sort of expected at that time that once we educated the community a little bit, that one of the Native organizations would pick up the work, and that didn't happen. So I think it was in 1988, 1989, we became a 501c3 and we hired our first staff person. And I came to work in 1990. I was the chair of the board before that, and we did a national search, and the personnel committee didn't find anybody, and they were going to put it out again. And I thought we had given them a grant, and so I either had to resign from the task force. It was called the Minnesota American Indian AIDS Task Force at the time, or my job at the Department of Human Services. And so what I did was I took a 2-year leave of absence. I just never went back. And I had been there for 10 years. So started this little organization, and one of my jobs at the state was to help programs have training technical assistance, funding their grants, doing all that kind of administrative work, and also being a liaison between tribal governments and urban programs and the legislature. So I like that job. But it felt more important at the time to do this other work. And so I've been there for 32 years, long time. And I think the thing that has kept me inspired over all the years was the prevention work that we do. You know, the first program I started was a youth theater program. It was called Ogichidagi Kinuamagi Youth Theater Peer Education Program. And in Ojibwe, Ogichida means warriors, and Gikinuamagi means teachers, and that's what they were. And they're very brave young people back in 1990 to go out into the community. There was still such a stigma. But they, you know, the first 7 years, I traveled with these kids to 27 states. And that program is still going today. Today, you know, we branched out into other areas of public health, tobacco prevention. You know, we always seem to take on those issues that nobody else wanted to deal with. When we started our tobacco work in 2000, the adult cigarette smoking rate for American Indians was about 69%, someplace in there. And today it's less. I'm not quite sure how much we brought it down to, just about 50%, I think. The rest of the state smoking rate in Minnesota has gone down to about, I think, someplace around 12% maybe. But anyhow, and then we got into some farming and growing medicines, and we have a new program called IndigiBaby. Should be on the market sometime this summer. And a lot of work in harm reduction. And you know, back in the 90s and around up until a few years ago, we were really able to educate the community and keep the HIV rates down. You know, there might be 1 or 2 Native people here that would test positive. And this last couple of years, we've had an outbreak, and mostly due to maybe some of you have heard about the Wall of Forgotten Natives. You know, this high rate of unsheltered people, poverty, COVID, all of those things created this perfect storm. And, you know, we saw this outbreak, not only in HIV, but also Hep C. So more of our work right now is focused on, you know, Narcan training, clean needles, and things like that. And we've started every Wednesday we have a fire outside. And so when people come to get their their cleans, they call them, and Narcan and fentanyl strips and so on, you know, there's that sacred fire right there. And they can choose if they want to offer some asema, some tobacco into that fire, some cedar. And maybe, you know, what I talk to the staff about is, you know, if we can just plant that little seed, you know, that desire. And I think it's working a little bit. We've referred a number of people in the last few weeks, more than we have before, to mat services, and so that's working a lot. We also did some peer-to-peer training with youth. Some of the older kids we've worked with over the years came back, and we had a woman from South Dakota come in and we used some of the curriculum from Oklahoma, and we trained them in peer-to-peer advocacy around opioid use. And now they're all doing internships in various agencies in the community. And out of the 12, I think we have one that's has not followed through, but all the other interns are doing well. And so, again, it's sort of, you know, in the community, we see so many things, you know, we see so many overdoses, and, but again, it's sort of the youth that we work with, the prevention work that we do, that, you know, give you some glimmer of hope for the future. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Pamela?
Sure. You know, my journey of commitment to working with HIV and AIDS really began because of some meaningful coincidences. I was working at Indian Healthcare Resource Center, which is, as Tommy said, the Tulsa Urban Indian Clinic, back in 1986. And Pam Myron was the director, and she was an awesome person who just let me kind of do everything that I wanted to do. And so I worked with a lady named Marlene LeClaire, who helped to write a grant, and we started Community House, which was substance abuse treatment. And so we were really excited about starting it, and we had our own building separate from Indian Healthcare Resource Center. And we arranged the kitchen. We did all of our assessments in the kitchen over coffee at the kitchen table. And it was just a really great place to work. I had a client there who had been a heroin addict, and he had been recently released from prison. And he was trying so hard to do well in life. He was a very, very kind Native man, and he'd had some really bad circumstances in his life that sent him to prison. And he was doing everything he could to make his life right. And he kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And we sent him to the clinic, and he had some tests done. And in 1987, AIDS was kind of new. And as Sharon said, it was AIDS, it wasn't HIV. And he was diagnosed with AIDS. I knew nothing about it at that point. And so I made it a commitment to find out what it was so that I could be a better therapist for him. And at the same time, my very, very close friend was dating a man that she fell madly in love with. And he was a very gentle, kind Choctaw man. And he also had AIDS. And she came to me and said, you know, my guy has AIDS, and I don't know what that is. And I said, I know a little bit about it, so let's work on it together. So we started checking into it and talking about it and finding everything we could. And about the same time, C. Everett Koop was the Surgeon General at the time. And he sent every household information about AIDS. And so that all three of those things kind of merged together. And then the state of Oklahoma offered the first grants ever in AIDS prevention, education, awareness. And so we had to find out more about it. We learned more about it as we wrote the grant, and we got the grant. And that was kind of my first door opening to find out what kinds of things we could and couldn't do. And from there, I then went into research, and we didn't have testing then. Back in 1987, it was just more treatment and trying to find out what could be done, and working with people and offering comfort. And then I went to Colorado State University, and we had a research project. I worked primarily in substance abuse epidemiology, prevention and research, and we wanted to find out more about how we could use our community readiness model for HIV/AIDS awareness. And so we started working in that field, and we wound up getting a CDC grant. And with that, we mainly provided capacity building assistance to Native tribes throughout the United States. And that's how I met Sharon and Tommy and Antony as well. And so the work that I think that we did as a group back then really made a lot of inroads. And it helped to have all of us together doing the same kind of journey and the same kind of path. And we developed National Native HIV/AIDS Awareness Day, and we put together PSAs and posters, and a lot of you participated in that. We had a support and assistance from most everyone on this panel, I believe. And that was amazing too. That was some amazing work that people did to promote that. Each community took it and owned it and made their own kinds of media announcements and their own kinds of harm reduction efforts. And it was a really good step forward. Then, not to be negative, but I think all of us felt the frustration when CDC quit funding natives. And that happened in 2014. CDC did not fund any native projects at the time for capacity building. And so we took a big step backwards, I think. And if it weren't for efforts that Sharon had, Sharon was funded as a CBO, and she was able to keep things going. And there was another group in Arizona. And then other than that, it was kind of everybody was on their own. And thank goodness for people like Sharon and Tony and Tommy and Karina, because things have kept moving forward. And I think that's about where I'll end.
Thank you. Tony, you're up.
Sure. Well, I kind of feel like I'm the baby of this group. Just kidding. By maybe a year or two, possibly. Just possibly. Anyway, I kind of like got into HIV work when I left Minneapolis when I was 23 years old, and not the wisest decision, I think. Well, I mean, it turned out okay, but now that I look back on it, I've made some really foolhardy decisions in my life. But one of the things I did was, when I was 23 years old, sold all of the things I had in my apartment, all my belongings, and raised enough money to get a airplane ticket to Los Angeles. And I moved from Minneapolis to Los Angeles with just a suitcase of clothes and $100 in my pocket and an airplane ticket to get there. And I did that mostly because I was newly clean and sober, but every single person I knew in my social circle, including my family and my friends in the gay community, pretty much all of them used drugs and alcohol. And I was newly sober, and I kind of had this epiphany at one point where I realized, like, if I didn't leave, I was likely to use again, and I might not survive, because I had just had a really close encounter with death. the 6 months before I moved to Los Angeles. So I show up there and I really don't know a whole lot of people and I really know what I'm going to do, and kind of integrated into the recovery community there. And then I land in Los Angeles in, March of 1986, April of 1986. And that's at kind of at the height of the beginning of that pandemic. And I was like, I started making friends and hanging out with people. And before I knew it, like everybody, I would meet people and like weeks later they'd be dead. And that was my first couple of years there. And I was just struggling and then I also didn't think, I was operating, I was a young man and I was operating under the assumption that I wasn't at risk for this thing because I lived in Minnesota and I didn't really know a whole lot of people in Minnesota at that time that had HIV. And we were just kind of hearing about it, and the talking heads and the pundits and on television and remember our president even mentioned the word AIDS for quite a long time. So I operated as though I was sort of like impervious to it, but then it kept getting closer and closer to me, like the experience of losing people that I knew and that I loved to HIV and to AIDS. And then I got involved in ACT UP. ACT UP was kind of like trying to remember the name of what was the thing that came before ACT UP. Sharon, do you remember? There was a movement before ACT UP. Can't remember the name of it, but that was very short-lived anyway. So ACT UP became this big national movement that Larry Kramer kind of helped to start and move across the nation. But I spent time in my first few years in Los Angeles doing like marching and doing die-ins, laying on the ground, having people paint the outline of my body on roads and stairs and the state legislature and stuff like that. So but then and that was all like highly political activism that I sort of like engaged in, which was important and meaningful, but it really wasn't until like I started having really close friends die that I became a little bit more motivated to understand it better. And it was actually the thing that community activism and having close personal friends die, people I loved, that sort of kind of moved me to go back to school and sort of like do something about that from that perspective. And so that's how I ended up becoming engaged in graduate school and kind of pursuing it, prevention sciences and stuff like that as part of my PhD in psychology. And then I get out of college and people who I'd met in my graduate program, people I had met like Karina and other folks were like, oh, you need to, you have this PhD, you got to do something, you're doing HIV prevention, you should do this. You should like, and I tell people now that like, I'm kind of the accidental psychologist. I didn't even intend to become one. I intended to do something completely different professionally. And then I kind of like, every single step of my sort of like career in HIV and substance abuse and mental health and prevention work has been sort of like, somebody in my social sphere, like the 4 people on this panel, or the 3 other people on this panel, or other people are like, you should go do this. You seem to have a knack for this, or you seem to be passionate about this. And they kind of direct me and recommend, and others too that aren't in this panel. But like, I really have like not with intention cultivated this career. It's sort of kind of like it just sort of, I kept putting one foot in front of the other, addressing the issue of the day as it related to, the health of our relatives, and kind of just ended up right here where I'm at now. which is in this community health center that I've been given the honor and the privilege of directing in. You know, and the year after I stepped into this role as the executive officer, the Wall of Forgotten Natives happened 4 blocks to the east of our organization. And, you know, we just saw so many critical issues going on in that encampment, like, you know, people overdosing, people living with open sores, sharing needle. Like, it was like when I didn't even know about the encampment until like 4 months in, and my outreach staff said to me, like, you should come to this encampment and visit some of these folks and see what's going on over there. So I did, and on the day I visited, it was particularly challenging because it was a really hot July day, and you know, I ran into like at least 3 relatives, people of my niece. I ran into my niece there, and a cousin, and some other folks, and it was pretty hard to walk through that encampment and see people struggling with in so many ways, and to see all the needles everywhere, and I was just like, oh my gosh, we got to do something. And so I left that walk and came back to the clinic, and I talked to one of my colleagues I can't remember, I think it was Joe Hobart, and I was like, we got to call the governor. We got to call the governor or the mayor or somebody, because this cannot. We got to do something about this. People are going to die from heat. There was no water. There was excessive heat, and we were headed into a long holiday, and it was just really deplorable situations there. The kind of things that you would imagine would be happening in developing countries, right? And so I picked up the phone and called somebody, and then I got the number to the mayor, and I called the mayor's office, and I was like, "We got to do something about this encampment. You know, the native leadership in South Minneapolis wants to meet with you." You know, and we weren't asking nicely, kind of demanding. But at the same time, I was also part of the statewide HIV Prevention Planning Council. I had been asked in my new role, I'd been recruited to be on that panel or that commission. And I remember having a conversation in one of the meetings that we were in the year before this Wall of Forgotten Natives thing happened. And there was, you know, the usual suspects in that meeting, you know, the directors of HIV prevention programs that served, you know, gay men who have sex with men and stuff. And I remember one person said, you know, why are we even having a conversation about directing resources to Native people for prevention? They had one case last year, and they had no cases this year. And I was like aghast at the comment, and I stood up and I was like, hold on a second here. You as a prevention scientist have to understand and know that you're not cultivating the response for what's happening like right now. And you also know that what's showing up in your data is a couple years old. You have to kind of look out at the landscape and predict where things are going to go, and use other indicators to understand that. And I said, the Native community has some of the highest overdose rates, and we have a burgeoning heroin epidemic that is primarily driven by IV drug use. I said, you must know that in a handful of years from now, we're going to be having an epidemic of HIV that is going to be quite out of control if we don't do something now. And then I got pissed off, and I stopped going to the commission because the guy was a jerk. And my voice was also falling on deaf ears at that time. So I was like, well, I can do more important work somewhere else than sit in this meeting and talk to these deaf ears. So I went off and did that. And lo and behold, here we are a few years later. We're in the middle of a 42-month spread of an HIV outbreak in Hennepin County and Ramsey County, the counties that my clinic serves, with some of the highest HIV outbreaks among unsheltered people, and the preponderance of those being among Native people who are unsheltered and struggling with opiate use disorder. So I do a lot of my work around that area now. In fact, actually, after I get off this call, I get to read out HIV application and we're submitting to expand our care in HIV and hepatitis C programming. And so that's really a big part of where I'm focusing my work, is like those in our community who are the most vulnerable. Because right now it's kind of centered around that group of folks, but it's only a matter of time before it kind of starts to expand out into the rest of our community, because that's the nature of an epidemic. It expands and it swells before we kind of get our arms around it. Anyway, that's me.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Tommy.
Well, good evening again, everyone. Listening to Tony and Sharon and Pam, I just want to acknowledge that, a lot of people think, in the general population, think that HIV is nothing to worry about anymore. And for those of us who have been in the trenches for 30 plus years, we've never stopped fighting, and HIV is still here. And the fight is very real, and it's still very real. And it brings up, every time I do one of these things and get to be with people that I've worked with for many years, I have a lot of mixed emotions. I feel the joy and the friendship and the love of the people that are still here and that are working in the field and trying to make a difference. And at the same time, I feel the pain and the loss and the suffering, and also having to deal with my own health as it relates to HIV and aging, which is a whole nother issue. We're getting more and more people over the age of 50 living with HIV, which brings in a whole multitude of new issues that we're having to deal with. I'll be 62 this summer. I have more trouble dealing with the diabetes that I have that was brought on by HIV than I do currently as far as treating my HIV. But a lot of people don't realize that, they think there's medications now, which that's true, and it's great, and I wouldn't be alive probably if there wasn't. But because of those medications and or the virus itself, many of us also have diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease, fatty liver disease, all of these other issues that we're having to continue to battle to stay in the fight. And I just want to acknowledge that before I kind of talk about my history a little bit. But when I got infected, I was actually in grad school in musical theater, and I was living in Oklahoma City, and I had 6 hours left to complete that degree. And after finding out about my infection, I tried to go back and finish those 6 hours, and I just psychologically wasn't ready to be able to do that. And so I was sort of existed for a few years, and then I was asked by a friend to attend the first state HIV conference in Oklahoma. And I met a young man named Rob Borders, who was living with AIDS, who was speaking publicly about it. And he was a real inspiration. And he passed away about a year later. And so he had been working with the State Department of Health doing trainings on HIV counseling and testing and educator training. And I applied for a job with the state health department and actually got a position doing the same thing Rob was doing in Oklahoma City, only in Tulsa. And I did that for about a year. And Pam mentioned the grant that Indian Healthcare Resource Center got, and they were able to hire someone named Truman Guerin. Do you remember Truman, Pam? Yeah, and Truman and I worked together on a lot of things, and unfortunately, and actually Truman just lived a few blocks from me, and Truman passed away from a heart attack, and that position came open at Indian Healthcare. And I wanted to work with my Native people, and so I applied for that job. And then so in 1992, I started working at the Native Clinic here in Tulsa. And at the time, and we had somewhere between 15 and 20 HIV infected or AIDS diagnosed patients in the clinic that were being seen in the clinic. And none of them are currently alive at this time. But I remember some of the things, making the clinic got together and we made a quilt panel for all of the people that we were seeing at the clinic to donate to be part of the AIDS Memorial Quilt. And I worked there for 10 years. I helped start through Indian Healthcare and the grants that we had, a Two-Spirit organization. And of course, those have expanded all over the country now. And there's a lot of very active Two-Spirit communities all around the country now. And the one that we started was connected to Indian Healthcare in its formal capacity is sort of dissolved. However, there's still a very active group up here in Northeast Oklahoma that still get together and do things. And matter of fact, they just had a pop-up powwow in Bentonville, Arkansas last weekend. And there's a Central Oklahoma group, and then there's groups all over the country that are doing supporting the Two-Spirit community, and part of that is doing HIV and AIDS prevention and caring for our brothers and sisters who are living with HIV or AIDS. From that point on, well, I'm going to back up a little bit and say that right after I started working for Indian Healthcare, I decided that I wanted to be public about my HIV status after Lisa Tiger, who's a Muskogee Creek citizen. She came to our clinic to actually announce her infection with Chief Mankiller. And Lisa and I became very good friends, and her sister Dana, and I got to know Chief Mankiller. And I decided I wanted to be public about my HIV status too. My family was very, very much against it. My family in Oklahoma and somewhat nationally, well, it depends on what you're involved in, but if you're involved in basketball or wrestling, people knew my family. My dad is in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. My uncle is in the National Basketball Hall of Fame. I can't say it right, Naismith Hall of Fame for basketball. And they just wanted me to keep my mouth shut about it. But I knew in my heart that the right thing to do is, if I wanted to make a difference, I couldn't keep my mouth shut, and I had to speak publicly about it and help bring more awareness to the disease and those that were at risk, and try to help also with the stigma around the disease and the homophobia and so on that was going on. So over the years, then I went to work for another organization for a while. I went back to school and got a master's degree in human relations, which is a combination of sociology and psychology. I now work on the faculty in sociology for Tulsa Community College. But over the years, like I said, I've worked with Pam and Sharon and Karina and Tony on so many projects. I couldn't even list them all because I know I'd start forgetting them. But there's a lot that we've worked on over the years, and I guess I'll go ahead and stop with that. And thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, everybody, for participating and sharing your stories. Would love to open it up now for questions from our general audience, and also just opportunity for you guys to discuss. As you were speaking, I know I had a lot of thoughts that crossed my mind about how things have evolved and where the direction people have taken and things like that. So if you have any thoughts as we discuss about kind of what your advice would be to people who are pursuing health services or health research around HIV/AIDS prevention in Indian country, what would your advice be given the next steps? And what do you think we need to grow more of for our future generations? So, but having said that, let's turn to and give the opportunity for other people to speak and ask questions. Thank you.
Hi, this is Connie Kellum from Seattle. I would be interested in your perspectives. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you all for your staying power. Some of you have been doing this for, sounds like several decades, and that takes a lot of commitment and tenacity. I guess I would love to hear your perspectives about I feel more optimistic about the potential to really do something with the epidemic now in the last decade than I have for a good long while. I guess I would, but that has to do with the advent of more effective tools, both for treatment and prevention. Do you think that is, and don't just say what you think I want to hear, but I'd really like your honest perspective. Is that news penetrating into communities who may get their care in more rural environments? Do you think the Native communities are aware of this? Does it sort of give you, do you have any advice for us about how to make sure that they are having access to what are really so much better treatment, so much more tolerable, and also prevention with pre-exposure prophylaxis?
My first thought about your question is, my first reaction is, I think that we are like so close to, resolving some of this. I think, we're probably closer than we've ever been. I think, like one of the things I think that, we've also, of course, we all of our communities and all of our relatives have also just sort of like, weathered this big, huge pandemic, for the last 24 and a half months. And we've learned a lot from that. One of the things I remember really early on, I actually ended up getting sick with COVID, and I was in the hospital, and it was really scary. And, I had, a lot of aha moments in that time when I was in the hospital. And one of the things I had when I had a lot of time to think about it, I was laying there, I was like, that the things that I was seeing happening around me as just like sort of like a person and my families, but also within my role as a healthcare provider, the things that were happening with COVID reminded me and mimicked like what my experience, my personal experience was with like HIV. And there was a moment in all of that where I was like, where I got really, a little bit hopeless, I think, and maybe even also like hopeless from the perspective of like here we go again. We haven't even like resolved this one condition. Now we have this condition, but also there were glimmers of hope in some of the conversations I was hearing and being like in like large meetings with like public health officials at the state and federal level, and conversations about the things that were coming down the pike. And I had to learn a lot about RMNA technology and a few other things because I was trying to like help our community and people understand the safety and the value of that particular vaccine, and help people to understand like how we could develop a vaccine so rapidly for a condition that was really impacting our communities, and have faith and confidence in it. So that was a big part of my work over the last couple of years. And I started to feel like, well, we might actually just find the solution to HIV with this mRNA thing. And then there was this part of me, that indigenous part of me, the activist part of me was like, yeah, we're going to find it. And you know what? We're not even going to be able to be eligible to get it. So they're going to be saving the lives of rich white people first. That was like that part of me that was like, yeah, but we'll be the last ones to get it, right? And so I always kind of like part of the experience I have in all of this, both from a personal and professional perspective. So I have to work hard to resist that sort of, or fight against that sort of that tendency to sort of feel like I'm swimming upstream and pushing a boulder uphill, and the lack of belief sometimes that we're going to be actually able to do something for our community that's meaningful and important. And so I spend some time there, but and then what helps with that is I bring myself back down to like what's in front of me. What's in front of me is people who are living unsheltered, who are struggling with opioid use disorder, and my investment in harm reduction as an approach. Our whole clinic has pivoted to sort of like this low barrier harm reduction model, and we've centered cultural healing as at the center of what we do. We start with that, and everything else sort of kind of moves outward from that, and all from the perspective of like, we don't have any ability to really help anybody if we don't keep them alive one more day, right? Which is what you're talking about when you're looking at like the conditions of like a day-to-day where it's 103 in the shade, and it's really hot, and we have a lot of people who are living unsheltered, like right out there, and they don't have homes, and they're struggling with opioid use disorder still, and they're, they could be transmitting all kinds of things because they need clean needles, and that's a lot of work to get clean needles to them and teach them to use it. And so in some ways, I think we're closer than we've ever been. And then there's some ways in which I feel like we're right back to where we were like in 1985. And it's just kind of like, there's so like this kind of have a foot in both worlds, so to speak. But I do think that, I've seen my colleagues here do amazing things. I've seen a lot of people do amazing things in our communities. And I happen to think as Native people, we are the original scientists, and we are innovators, and we're like creative, and we're, and the power of prayer. I've seen the power of prayer do amazing things over the last few years, both personally and professionally. And so I think we're on the precipice of some stuff. Just got to kind of keep our nose to the grindstone and keep doing our work, and don't give up, and have faith, and invite Creator to step in and help us clear our path, right? I think will be a good trajectory. I don't know if that was helpful or not, but.
Well, I just want to say that, for the last, 10 years or so, about once a year, I go up and speak to students at UMD and the medical school, Native students, and have been participating and seeing them graduate. And I usually speak to the first year medical students, Indian students, and and help them with some other things too. But I think what I find uplifting is these young medical students. They are they're not just in this Western school. They're looking at indigenous ways of healing. And we see that more and more, even with the foods, the natural medicines. And when COVID began, when we had the lockdown here in Minnesota, I was fortunate to be given a fellowship that came with a cash award. And so I bought this 40 acres out in the country, and I moved April 28th, whatever year that was. And there was a group of indigenous women out in the East, Gudgy Cook and some of those folks, they talked about what we could do about COVID. And so we did that. And we all did that. And Gudgy said, so because she's in the East, right? She said, as I make my prayers in the morning, I'm going to think about those prayers following the sun from the East, going all the way across Turtle Island to the West, and gathering your prayers as it goes. And so, to my family and myself, we put those tobacco ties outside along with our clan colors and a feather, and stayed safe for a long time. I think I finally got COVID last December, but no symptoms, very, very few symptoms. And I think the more, it used to be like if people went to school, they got into academia, they sort of left, that they were in that world, and not so much within the indigenous community. And people used to call me, graduate students would call me and ask me questions about this and that. And sometimes I would tell them, however many years you go to school in that Western school, that's how many years you need to go to ceremonies. And then you will be of great value to the community. And I see that happening more and more. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And, they say in this time that we're in this time of the seventh fire, a new people will emerge. Well, we are all those new people. And we are the ones that are going to make that decision, which way to go, to uplift everybody towards peace and harmony, or continue on this path towards disharmony and destruction. So that's, I think I just encourage, whatever institution you're in your graduate work. I have a young graduate person who lives with me, going to be a psychologist. I think she has 2 more years left. And, but her education as a Anishinaabe is just as important. And one day, she's going to really change the world. And so I think that's what I would say to people, take that study as important as you do the other study. And I can see all kinds of wonderful things happening in the future. Thank you.
If I could add something to what Sharon said, I thoroughly agree with everything that Sharon said, and Tony as well. What I would like to also see is more people going into positions of in agencies such as NIH and SAMHSA and CDC that are committed to Native issues and can make policy changes and make sure that there are grants that are funded and that there are programs and there are trainings for people who don't know anything about Indigenous life. And that's something I would encourage people to do. I know of 2 young Choctaw women right now that have just gotten positions of power, is what I would call it, at SAMHSA. And I'm so proud of them because already they're changing the face of what SAMHSA is funding, and they're advocating for Native groups and Native grantees And they've already made a difference. And one has only been in her position less than 6 months. And the other one just started her position, but she hit the ground running. So I would really like to see people go into those positions to be government project officers, to be people who make those kinds of decisions, that set on task forces for NIH and things like that.
I just wanted to add, one of the part of your questions was dealing with people in rural areas versus other people that might live in a more urban area and have access to things. And I think access is a big issue. And I think that we need to be working on that in a big way across the board. Equity is something that many communities do not have, whether that be educational equity, health equity, economic equity. There's so many things that around equity that contribute to HIV, but not just to HIV, but to multiple issues that our communities deal with. And like Sharon said, having knowledge of both the Western and your Native community together, and combining that can make some people extremely valuable to their communities and help, I think, resolve some of that equity issues that are out there. And I'll just say, for instance, like I'm in teaching, I had a young woman a few years ago who, in my class, who was half Lakota and half Muskogee Creek. She lives down here, but she wanted to go up to the pipeline protests, and she wanted to be able to leave class and miss some class. And I teach sociology, and I'm thinking, well, what she's going to learn more up there than she's going to learn in my class. And so it's like, I was sure you can go. And there have been other students who wanted to leave for ceremony or things, and I've allowed them to go. And where other instructors that are more of the Western mindset, I would guess, or European mindset, and thinking that you have to be in class every time, and I can't make adjustments for your education. You have to do the exact same thing that everybody else does. That's not equity. And I just remember one of those students coming, and I hope she goes on and continues with their education, but saying that I was the first professor that she had had who recognized her for being Native, and that the things, and recognized what was important for her to do that was more important than being in my classroom for a couple of days. And that's what equity is. And I guess what I'm getting at is that we need to try to educate others to support and give people whatever their inequities are that they have, the support they need to achieve and be successful. And I think there's too many places where Native people or other marginalized populations are overlooked and not given the resources or the understanding that they need to be successful. Like, that was just something that came to my mind when you were speaking, or with your question.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Oh, I just wanted to highlight something that as I'm listening to you guys speak, the one thing that the COVID-19, and I think HIV/AIDS first did this, but COVID-19 kind of punctuated it even more recently, is that we live in a world of syndemics, multiple synergistic epidemics that are hitting our community, that's rooted in structural systemic inequities and lack of access to adequate housing, electricity, services. I mean, we could just go on, but all of that, already puts us in compromised health situations. And so when a pandemic hits, whether it's HIV/AIDS or other infectious diseases like, COVID-19, it just exploits those pre-existing situations and makes it even more difficult for our communities. And it actually, in some ways, causes, and I think this is where we don't look like typical HIV/AIDS service providers or researchers or activists or leaders, because we recognize the interaction of all of these things. And sometimes when we're seeking housing, seeking shelter, looking for a way to mitigate the impact of suicide and substance abuse that is exacerbated by these situations, we're actually addressing still HIV/AIDS. And I think the Western world doesn't always understand it that way. But I think we do, because we understand that these things are really interconnected. And I just wanted to highlight that because I think all of your stories have really, really illustrated that. And that, when we hit one of those areas and we target one of those areas, it has an impact on all those other areas. And so it means that we sometimes have to educate, where we can get funding to get support to create services in our communities. So we have to educate and, like, Pam said, literally put people in those positions to make some of this be decision makers. But I think what Sharon and others and all of you have also emphasized, and Pam too, is that, well, just that's not enough if we aren't culturally grounded and centered. And if we're not building from our indigenous knowledges and worldviews and the science that we already have created and continue, since time immemorial have evolved, and we've continued to create in new ways. And I think the creativity of our community is astounding and amazing. And we're, integrating new medicines even as we go into the next 7 generations. So, so I love what Sharon, I loved what you said about the importance of giving something very concrete to our young people, which is, well, I say young people, I mean, you can be an older person also getting your degree, obviously, but for people entering into the Western paradigm, that to get that education, but never lose value or lose sight of the importance and centering of our indigenous knowledges and education and our cultural knowledge and education, and the importance of those two walking together. But really, I think it's more about, it's not a tagging a feather approach. I just want to clarify for non-natives approach that we're talking about. We're not slapping a medicine wheel onto a Western construct here. we're talking about really building from our indigenous knowledges and then bringing in Western insights or thoughts or experiences that could be beneficial to our community on our terms. And that's a different approach than how we're socialized in these Western systems, where we're told that, the primary way of thinking is a Western way of thinking. So I think it's important to hear from our indigenous activists and elders here that, it's important. No, it's important. It's vital that we start from our knowledges and build from there. And if you're not connected, get connected and make that commitment to being connected. And I love that prescription to at least match the number of years you've been an educator or educated in the Western world. You got to go out and serve your community and be in ceremony. So I think that was really beautiful. So anyways, I'm talking too much, but that's just what was flowing through my mind as I listened to you all speak, and just wanted to share that.
I just have a kind of a funny story to relate. Some years ago, 2017, I think I went to Standing Rock for the second time, and I took a bunch of clothes and 100 pounds of rice and things like that. And so I thought, well, I'm gonna take it to the Two-Spirit camp. So I pull up and, and I go up to and so I tell, young woman who is there, I have some things to donate. And she looked at me and she said, this is a two-spirit camp. So I said, my name is Sharon Day. And
Oh,
she just looked at me and she said, well, this is a two-spirit camp. And I said, well, I'm Sharon Day. And, back in the day, like I felt like I was pretty notorious, right?
right.
2017, they don't know who the hell I am.
Oh man.
And so things change over time. And, and you see young people today, I see a lot of kids I work with, it's Pride Month here in Minnesota. And, they're displaying, all these pride images. And, that's really, things do change. And that is change. That, homophobia, is not what it was when we first started doing this work. And that, has a lot to do with the work that everybody did working in HIV and around the LGBT movement. And so I just, what? I'm Sharon Day.
I'm the king. I'm the king of the two-spirit women.
You're like the you're like the Rodney Dangerfield of HIV and the gay world. Like you can't get no respect.
Well, on that note,
That's funny.
we're actually running out of time, but I Sharon, it also reminds me of the time we were sent all over town to go get stuff to build a lodge for another gathering.
Oh, that was funny.
All of you guys, thank you. All of you, thank you for your beautiful spirit and service to our communities and your ancestors. And I know through the works that you've done, you've already created a beautiful path for the next 7 generations anyway. So I just wanted to say thank you. And thank you for sharing your experiences and stories with everybody today. Please we'll make sure that we get your addresses because we have some follow-up with you all after this. But I also want to thank people for joining us today. And for those who are going to watch this video in the future, thank you as well. And everybody, if you get to see Sharon again, you'll know that she is a two-spirit activist from back in the day.
You'll be able to recognize her and name her.
Yeah, and thank you, Sharon Day, Dr. Antony Stately, Tommy Chesbro, Dr. Pamela Thurman, all of you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom. Yakoke.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
You all,
As
and
well.
happy Pride Month to everyone who celebrates. Take care.
Thank you.